Well, Matt, I mean, we got some stuff to chat about, right? Um, how do we want to sort of set this bit up here?
Democracy, a big
We
concept.
love it, folks. We love it.
It's a big concept. It's also the name of one of the major political parties, the one controlling the White House currently. Uh, now the so Marianne Williamson announced that she's running for president. She's challenging Joe Biden. Personally, well, we'll talk broadly about how we feel about that in a little bit. Uh, f- I just want to first say, let's play this way of the Biden White House responding. This is Press Secretary uh, Karine Jean-Pierre. You shouldn't like a press secretary. Press secretaries, if you find yourself admiring a press secretary of the United States, just know you're admiring a liar. Like that's that job. And KJP is no different. Really than Psaki or even Huckabee Sanders and Spicer, right? Like it's a liar job. Uh, now, this let's just play it.
Yeah.
This was very off-putting, I'll say.
Is the president annoyed, frustrated with Marianne Williamson for jumping in the race ahead of him? Did he want a clearer field to run against the Republican nominee in 2024?
No, I just up there at the framing of that question is so it is very anti-democratic, very
Mhm.
anti-politics. This is, I would contend, one of the real reasons Hillary, people just turned against her is because of that whole, literally, it was ready for Hillary,
My turn.
right? Like, exactly. What are you talking about?
Mhm.
Right? It makes this is an exclusive club that you're not in
Mhm.
too explicit.
Mhm.
And, I got,
No. I'm just saying, especially in a party like the Democratic Party, which, unlike when we had Heather on the program in the UK, the Labour Party's fucked up. Don't think that I'm over here dreaming fondly about what that would be like.
old
Um,
Starmer Griscom over here.
but it's important to recognize that the Democratic Party operates in a very, very different way than like a UK Labour Party, in the sense
Mhm.
of people who are regular voters in it or quote unquote members in it, like registered Democrats, have virtually no influence over the party except for whether or not they line up behind a nominee. In these are probably the only times in the Democratic Party experience that members or people who vote for the Democratic Party get to have any kind of influence over who the nominees are or who those officials are, right? That's why
Mhm.
people get rightfully frustrated when the Democratic Party just sort of says oh no, this is our person.
Yeah. Yeah, and well, let's continue playing this before we get to Bernie.
Just not tracking that. I mean, if I had what is it called? A little globe here, crystal ball, then I can tell you. But I imagine 8 ball, whatever. If I can feel her aura, I just don't have I just don't have anything to share on that.
I
And
gotta
that's the,
say, yeah,
I'm just saying the press room, they're that's such DC energy.
just the worst, that cackle of this is the
Yeah.
Friars roast all of a
Body
sudden.
slam. You know what I mean?
And
It's no, it's a very poorly delivered joke. If you're gonna slam, you gotta slam.
yeah, and so, we're gonna get to Marianne's response in a second. I just want to say one of the things I like that Bernie played footsie with challenging Obama in the primary, or supporting the challenge to Obama in the primary in 2010. I think that stuff is fairly fine. And it all really depends on how you do it and what gets done through
Mm.
it. I think there's a certain sect of people who want you to act like there can be no downside to a third party challenge. From a standpoint, which is ridiculous. We know the Democrats support libertarians and stuff like
Mhm.
that if they can help them electorally. The same thing with Republicans supporting, say, pro pot third party candidates. In like, I think we need to be adult about that. Um, eh, but nonetheless, I think with that in mind, democracy is good, and discussing these. Uh, Using this as a platform to discussing ideas, I'm here for that to a certain extent. We'll talk about where it gets limited, but I'm here for that. Let's play Marianne's response to this, and for what it's worth.
I was so sad to see the commentary of the president's press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, about me, about crystal balls, which I've never spoken or written about, and auras, which I've never spoken or written about, and just speaking.
Now, I will say, like, I would assume she mentioned it once or twice, because that really does get affixed to her a lot, and that is a pretty, I can imagine that being pretty
Meme, yeah.
frustrating. Yeah, to be dealing with
So
that.
derisively and in such mocking terms about someone who is running for president of the United States. And as a woman, and this is the Democratic Party, I have a constitutional right to run, and my candidacy is about substantive issues and policies. I have made it clear in interview after interview that the president is a nice man and that I have no interest in taking personal pot shots. But apparently the White House, or at least as expressed by Karine, doesn't share my commitment to the high ground. The hypocrisy here is something that all of us can see, because the president has said on his first day in office that anyone in his administration who spoke disrespectfully about anyone would be fired on the spot. Now, I'm not hoping that Karine Jean-Pierre loses her job over this, but I do hope that from now on,
So,
this.
we could just jump in there. Like, so generally, like she says, like, I thought this was a Democratic Party. I do think that is a fundamental hypocrisy. A party that is really very allergic to any sort of democratic challenge. On the other hand, I can't help but think, like, if Bernie was in that situation, he would have pivoted 8 times to, like, this, I'm here for working people, right? And so, like, the thing is like, an ideas and Marianne tweeted just to this evening, Cop City is, to put it bluntly, and this is where I think this is valuable. Cop City is, to put it bluntly, the infrastructure for a police state, plus it is a template they're planning to recreate in other cities as well. Those who were protesting are not criminals, they are heroes, and we'll get to more on this in the future about Cop City and coming after on people with terrorism charges. Those who were protesting it are not criminals, they are heroes. The fact that their behavior is being criminalized, labeled domestic terrorism, is as bad as it gets, and then taking in Warnock, Ossoff, and Abrams.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's great.
Good. That's really good.
Yeah. Fundamentally, though, like, I don't think she's going to be as good on even just the bringing the conversation to important things as Bernie was, because I think that's a very tough thing to ask. Because I think Bernie was, because of his repetitiveness, good at that. And then the main thing, like that really, I think, would make me sit up a little bit straighter when I talk about a Marianne 24, would be if, like, the nurses union endorsed her, right? Like, I'm looking at her website, I see a lot of issues. Elizabeth Warren had a lot of great issue papers too. But I'm not here to look at prospective policies. I want to know you and what army. So if Marianne can get buy-in from progressive groups and unions particularly, then that's when I think this starts to be a real, like, a challenge. But other than that, like,
I sorry if I was doing too much with my face there. All I'm saying is, like, also just know how unions are in this country. Unfortunately, like, that was something Bernie struggled with, and Biden was able to run circles around him with, right?
Yes.
Like, unions that broke were ones that had more democratic and militant membership and leadership than the ones that endorsed Biden over Bernie, right? And I'm just saying, like, I think it's really important because, like, you and I both hold the same position about the state of American labor, that, like, we just did a Rosa Luxemburg episode, and we talked about some of the structural difficulties, and, like, there's no doubt about it. And I don't think that people, I don't think that people who know this stuff are sort of mystified by it. But I do think a lot of, like, sorry to use, like, a online term, but, like, baby leftists can sometimes be a little confused by this. Is that, like, while we support and are trying to build the labor movement, inside of the labor movement, there's a fight right now about whether or not the labor movement is representative of laborers and, like, union members, or whether it's an appendage of the Democratic Party. And that's something that we've seen over the years in the labor leadership, is that they're very, like, conservative, and they're very, very much more attached to, like, the power center of the Democratic Party versus, like, more radical or socialist or even just progressive sides of it. So, like, just I'm just saying to be as fair as possible. I 100% agree with what you're saying, Matt. Like I feel the same way in the sense of like,
Right.
where is the base? Like, where's the coalition? Is this developing in some kind of serious way, or is this just like an avatar for people who hold certain ideas to sort of place their hopes and dreams on? Like that's definitely where I would. That's where I'm going to be. That's where I'm going to judge how effective this campaign or movement is. But I also think it's fair to be able to be like, well, a lot of the unions are just going to automatically line up again
Of course.
with Biden because that's just how it is. Anyway, sorry, not
Right. No, I mean, and that's just like how we move, and I don't think it's not worthwhile if she never gets that kind of support, which I don't think she will. Particularly as you say, like a guy running for re-election as opposed to Bernie when it's a open field to replace
Mhm.
Obama. But ultimately, like I remember all the attacks Hillary, like you supported, or Hillary people would be like, you supported primarying Obama. How dare you like support even think about such a thing?
Mhm.
And like ultimately that says what you need to know about the Democratic Party. And we're going to have this sort of pedantic debate over rigged, but that is like when people say rigged in a certain sense, like, yes, this is what they mean when say like we should have a wide open field, or we should have stalking horses that are going to ultimately support this candidate and wipe out any sort of independent challenge to that. Like that is like a problem.
So let me be explicit here. I mean, I think we have a few more things that we want to talk about. And I want to talk even more broadly than this, but let me just say this right up top, just to be clear. I'm not enamored yet with the possibility of this campaign, and I'll talk about why in a minute. But before we even get there, I want to say a few things up top that I think are really crucial. Is apparently it's never okay to criticize the Democratic Party. In 2020, we can't criticize the Democratic Party. We can't criticize Joe Biden because there's Trump. Biden beats Trump. And remember, like this is when we first started Left Reckoning, Matt, January, February. You can't criticize Biden because like we need to be united behind him so that he can get these things done. And then
Yep.
6 months later, once you start to have this development of the Manchin cinema veto power over our democracy, you can't criticize Biden because Manchin and cinema are being bad faith actors, and criticizing this is only helping their movement, right?
Right.
And then it's 2022. We're going in the midterms. You can't criticize Biden because we have to make sure that the Republicans never come back into power. If you criticize Biden, you're opening up the door for the Republicans. Now here we are in 2023, maybe setting up for a kind of Democratic Party cycle, a primary cycle. You can't criticize Biden because that means that Trump or the Republicans are going to be able to win power. The point I'm making here is that if you're younger, right, and these are your first couple presidential cycles, right, and like even for you and I, Matt, I mean, look, I'm 30, right, like I've only been able to vote 12 years now. I've gone through a few of these now, and I've seen this constant cycle. You can't criticize the Democratic Party because of this. You can't criticize the Democratic Party because it's not the time to do so. And what I think people really need to remember, just going into another presidential election, when that chorus gets the loudest, is that they are saying it is never possible. It is never correct. It is always dangerous. It is always harmful to our democracy to criticize the most powerful people in the world.
Yeah.
Right? And like, this is a secondary thing, but I mean, we talked about on the program last week, Matt, about how Biden's weakness is now going to allow SNAP benefits to be cut, is now going to allow Medicaid expansion to be cut. And, we were talking about it in the context of East Palestine, where you had all these liberals saying, well, these people deserve it, right? These people deserve it. Well, are you going to get that saying, oh, voters in New Mexico who voted for Biden deserve to have their food stamps cut, right? No, of course not, because that'd be disgusting and a horrible argument to make. The point is that there are all these rules that are created to not criticize people who do harm to working folks. Yes, the Republicans are bad. We all know that. But at a certain point, there has to be an acceptance and an understanding that these folks, if they aren't maybe the ones sprinting to the front lines of like wanting to do harm to people, they are at least tacit enablers. In a lot of cases, like President Joe Biden, active participants in class war against working people, looking at it from what's happening right now with social benefits, looking at what happened with the railroads, right? With the railroad unions when he locked arms with the Republicans to block that strike. What I'm saying is that like I just I can't go through it I can't fucking go through it again. And like we can talk about strategic differences, we can talk about tactical differences, we can talk about political differences, but at a certain point, the kind of attitude that you get from the Democratic Party, right? At this moment right now, they're saying, "Oh, this is a sideshow. It's not serious. We're going to treat it as if it's just a bunch of clowns," right? If it gets attention or mobilization or anything like that, then you start to get these are traitors, these are dangerous people, these are closet Republicans or whatever, right? It's never a good faith engagement with the fact that a lot of people in this country think that it's wrong that the supposed party that's supposed to be in opposition to everything that the Republicans want to do seems to be very, very effective distributors of Republican Party policy.
Yeah. And I'd also just add, I think it's false a premise that this is bad for even the fucking Democratic Party. Like, I think this openness, like, I think it actually would have electoral positive outcomes. I think it just makes them uncomfortable policy wise, and that's why they don't like it. Like, it's like the George Floyd protests, like and how much they like run away from any sort of like police accountability stuff now, but that all served the Democrats. They've got votes based on that, even like the folks that are running away from it now. So like I think it's also like the idea that politics fucking arguing about this stuff, I think is just like, even if it wasn't good, it would still be worthwhile doing it. But like I think that theory that it's somehow harmful to have debate about this shit is just I just don't really buy it.
Totally. And I think that this is one of those times where you can see who people are. And like, again, we'll talk about Marianne and like this candidacy and like what our thoughts about it. I mean, we've been talking about it obviously, this whole time, but like a little bit more strategically, and like I'll just be honest about what I think about it in a second. But like this is where you can also see like the kind of gatekeepers of quote unquote like respectable politics, like like to play. And like I'll bring up a fellow David Pacman, who's apart from this. Remember, like we've been criticizing some Pacman stuff. Particularly, like for example, on Evo Morales, somebody who was taken down by just lies, supported by like somebody was taken down with like a lot of like American business interests, and somebody who, when he was taken down, was only emboldened the most fascist and far right movements in Bolivia. Right, Pacman was one of these people who was aligned with the respectable liberals, saying, "Oh well, Evo Morales probably is a dictator." Right, I can't prove it. Right, people on the ground are saying it's wrong, but I'm just going to go with the United States State Department line on this kind of stuff that has now been undeniably, like it's proven at this point, that all the claims and the attacks against Evo Morales were false. And in fact, they were manufactured in order to allow a minority in the country, in Bolivia, to overthrow the democratically elected president of the country, and set the country for into a very, very dark path for a few years. And look, this is what Pacman is designed to do when it comes to the Marianne Williamson.
Marianne Williamson has no experience relevant to being president of the United States. If you tell me, hey, you know what, David, we have too many like lawyers who are president or business people who are president. We need people from different backgrounds. I'm with you. I want scientists as presidents. I want, people who have led nonprofits would be great for presidents. I would like to see people from the field of education be president. I'm with you. We have too narrow a scope for people that eventually become president. But Marianne Williamson has no relevant experience, no relevant expertise, no qualifications, and also none of the relationships that would make you a more effective president. She's for Medicare for all. That's great. She believes climate change should be taken seriously. Great. But she's not going to push Biden to the left.
And there's more of that. That's just what was put on Twitter by his, show's account. So just take that as this is not me clipping things. That's the editorial that's done there. Look, I mean, in the second I'm going to have, some doubts that I do still hold about this. Right. But I'm going to tell you right now, the reason we're doing this in, like, for example, even in the post game instead of like the main story of the night, is that like I don't think that like the role of independent media in this country right now is to be attacking the Marianne Williamson campaign. Right. Again,
Yes, yeah.
I have some doubts here. I'm not convinced that this is the avenue. But I'm just being completely honest. I don't necessarily think that it's like harmful or something that should be like opposed. I understand that's for some people, they really feel like that's the avenue where they need to be playing politics. I will just say, not pat myself on the back. I've been a very, very, very consistent on this. Even before Bernie's 2020 run, I was saying this in 2018, and I got more explicit about it after Bernie's loss in 2020, that the left and the socialist movement in this country really needs to get out of the fixation on presidential politics. I know why people focus on them. I know why it's something that like feels very mobilizing, because you're talking about holding the highest, most powerful office in the system. But I think the fixation on it actually creates some really sloppy tendencies on our side. So anyways, I'm just saying this to say that I'm not even doing this because like I'm like somebody who's 100% like partisan Marianne 2024 person, right? Though of course I am biased because she's a Texan, and y'all better be fucking very nice to this sweet woman, right? But when you see people who are supposedly like on the progressive side basically saying that we need to sort of X this out, that we can't like that engaging in this is like, I mean, like the implication here is that this is something that's like exceptionally dangerous for the movement. I just don't find that to be a very effective, like if I don't find the Marianne Williamson campaign, for example, to be maybe like the best hope for us to build a real strong worker movement, socialist movement in this country, I also don't think that the role of the independent media and the socialist movement, I know Pacman's not a socialist, should be like playing goalie on this, right? Trying to block this thing from happening, attacking it, doing what the mainstream media is going to do here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's the thing, is like it's what's between the lines, and like I have real problem with the explicit thing. Like, first of all, leaders of nonprofits, what the fuck are we talking about here?
And also, if you don't know what we're talking about, we did a whole episode on NGOs on Left Reckoning that y'all should listen to. But yeah, no, totally. No, also, I'm sorry. Like, I'm not trying to make it personal with Pacman, but it's like, even the sign, like this whole, like, it's such an idealist,
it's technocratic
I'm
bullshit.
being a bit of a Marxist here, but it's such a like, oh, a scientist politician would be good, or what if we had a comedian politician or whatever, right? It's like, the point is like, what are these like representatives of, right? Are they like the backstory for me is like the only part of the backstory for me that really matters is how that reflects its attachment and its potential connection with like working class voters in this country. You get what I mean? Right. Absolutely. Like this idea that like a scientist was going to be an enlightened leader of this country because of the fact that they're a scientist, or an NGO leader is going to be a great leader of this country because they're an NGO or lawyer or whatever. Right. It's just like that's not how I think about politics at all.
No, it's exactly that's what it's like. Whose coalition are there? Like, and who can she speak to? And like, does she like bring like that rank and file? Like, Bernie caused a lot of ferment. I mean, I don't want to overstate it, but like among rank and file versus leadership on some of those
things.
No,
100% he did.
Yeah. And it's like and like, to be honest, that's what people are afraid of when it comes to like any sort of idea campaign, is like, if you get these things talking, and like I honestly, the more we talk about it, like, and I think we'll maybe move to like the downsides, but like I do think I welcome it. And like this Cop City stuff, if she can stay on message, I'm less interested. Like, it's my right to run. Like, it was like rights to run, sure, but like you're running for this important shit, and like I
still prefer. I mean, I will say I would still prefer Bernie 24,
of course,
than this. Even though I have like, we've had Ben on the show, we've debated this, and I'm pessimistic on Bernie. It's also just being like clear about like where my pessimism comes from too. It's not even directed at like Marianne in particular. It's some of these other things. But like, I mean, I mean, we haven't even got to the crux of this stuff. If you're game for Matt, I want to play her announcement so we can sort of look at that and talk about it a little bit more substantially. But like, we opened up, I think if people are watching us and are regular listeners of Left Reckoning, and you'll want to sort of maybe get a sense of how I think you and I are going to cover this, That's how I'm going to cover it, in the sense of like the Biden administration coming at her for daring to run, right? Fuck that.
Defensive.
Right.
Yes.
Like people like Pac-Man deciding that like they need to. I mean, the thing is, like, by the way, these weren't like throwaway things for Pac-Man. This was a grab bag, right? I could have pulled a bunch of different things. Like, he dedicated a lot of his time and energy to like attacking the entire concept of this campaign, and Marianne Williamson as a person. I didn't even bring up some of the other attacks he made against her. He's attacking her like spirituality or whatever. And people who know me know that I'm not really won over by that kind of thing. And just to be like open about these things, I come from like a more like alternative religious like family. I know I sometimes present, maybe I come from a more like Presbyterian or whatever, like Christian upbringing, but I come from like that kind of granola. And like these we're talking about my family, people I love, right? I'm not like trying to mock. I'm just saying like this is stuff that like I'm familiar with. I understand and I have sympathy for, right? It's not really my thing. I also have some criticisms of it too. But I respect people for it. I'm not going to attack somebody for having, certain kinds of spiritual beliefs. I just find that to be really odious. Anyway, so like if you want to get the general tenor of how I think we're going to be engaging with this over the next few months as it starts to develop, is that like these attacks from the centrists and from the kind of like the people who sort of stand between the centrist liberals and like the progressives who are going to be attacking her, I'm going to be coming at them 100%, because
Right.
I think that their tendency is actually not to make the left stronger or anything like that. I don't trust it. But anyways, we've set this up enough to be able to say directly what we think about it. This is Marianne's announcement video.
I'm Marianne Williamson, and when I was growing up, America had a vibrant middle class. The average American worker had decent benefits, could afford a home, could afford a car, could afford a yearly vacation, could afford for one member of the couple to stay home if they wished, and could afford to send their kids to college. But over the last 50 years, there's been a massive transfer of wealth to the tune of $50 trillion from the bottom 90% of Americans to the top 1%, decimating America's middle class. We all owe President Biden a debt of gratitude for defeating President Trump in 2020. But with the things that they're going to be throwing at us in 2024, we need to submit to the American people an agenda of fundamental economic reform, universal health care, tuition-free colleges at state colleges and universities, higher education including tech schools, paternity and maternity leave, free child care, and a guaranteed living wage. These are things that are considered moderate positions in every other advanced democracy. But in the United States, people have been trained to expect too little. The American people have been played. What the Democratic Party should do is to truly return to the principles of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Not just alleviate people's suffering, but offer them genuine economic reform. Not just help people survive in an unjust system. The Democratic Party should end an unjust system. Washington, D.C., with a few brave exceptions, is filled with two major categories of leaders: those who don't even care about all the suffering that's going on out there, and those who do not have the moral courage to fix it. Let me in there. I will. I'm Marianne Williamson, and I approve this message.
All right. So let's start with the good, right? The policies here. I mean, look, these are things we support: Medicare for all, free public tuition, talking about the fact that there's been pilfering of working class people. Again, I think there's a difference here, though, middle class versus working class. I think there's a difference there in how I talk about these things. I think you can. I know.
A studied one. There's
What?
a reason middle class. There's a reason middle class won, and that's the one is used more, in American politics.
I think you can also see, and I think this is a positive thing in terms of people who I trust. I think that you can see, I know Harvey has been in conversation with Marianne Williamson, and I think you can see some of that influence there, talking about, for example, FDR. I think that's generally positive. And look, I mean, like what we're getting here, how am I going to categorize this on like the map like the political ideology map. This is what I think a kind of more rational, realistic Democratic Party could and should be, right? In the sense of like, it's not particularly like anti-capitalist, it's progressive, right? And I've been becoming a little bit more explicit, not to be an old stodgy Marxist or anything like that, but I think it's important sometimes to understand that we could go into coalition to continue to try to build and fight for things with progressives, but there's a very significant difference between a socialist and a progressive.
Yeah.
But like, look, this is what the Democratic Party's turned their back on, and I think it's been harmful for the Democratic Party to turn their back on that kind of progressive liberal position that I think Marianne Williamson is laying out there. So, is this somebody who, in terms of like policy, the things that they want to do, is somebody who's stronger than Biden? I think 100%. I don't think it's even close. Right. And all things considered, right? Unless something, this is early, who knows? 2024, David's walking into his polling booth in Austin, Texas for the Democratic presidential primary. Probably vote for Marianne over Biden. I think the bigger question is, what does this mean for the left? What does this mean for our movement? And how should we think about it and engage with this campaign? Because I think a lot of Bernie people, particularly Bernie media people, are going to go very hard for this campaign. And I get why, right? It's something that folks in media like a lot, right? This is an opportunity for us to continue to promote our ideas. Yeah. I'm going to tell you all right now, I think that there's a limit to that. I think that at this point, there's a significant limit to that. 2020, this is one of the disagreements with the forced to vote people, right? We're going to make Medicare for all a big national issue. Well, what happened in 2020? Do you remember that campaign at all, Matt? What was the number one issue in 2020? Healthcare. It was something that was talked about nonstop, right? The idea that we haven't gone through like a national episode of like debating and having conversations about different alternatives for healthcare, I think is inaccurate, right? We have. People have heard these things, and people support Medicare for all, right? In a lot of ways, like that argument has been won in the sense that like, what do people like? People like that idea, right? A lot of voters don't think that these things are viable, right? They think that these things are hopeful and idealist and fantastical. I mean, look, it's our job to try to convince them differently. But I also think that the challenge for the left right now, and I think this is a really hard thing for media people to get, is less so convincing the general public that such and such policy is good, right? Because these things are popular, right? Why are they not put in place? It's because of power. It's because of power. It's because of the interests of people like Joe Biden. It's because of interests like people in the Democratic Party to prevent these things from coming into being. So, at a certain point, like if the argument for the Marianne Williamson thing is that like we're going to basically do a national like awareness campaign on these kind of things, it's like, well, we've done that, right? What we need to be doing right now is building up the capacity to put these things into place. And do I think that this is the viable vehicle to do that? I'm sorry, friends. I have serious doubts. Like if Bernie was like came up against the wall on this, I think that some of the criticism that you've been sort of like hinting at throughout this, Matt, is that like the messaging just isn't as strong as Bernie's messaging, right? Is it going to be able to break through that logjam? I don't think so. That's not me saying that like I think that like you should be against this or that you shouldn't support it in some like kind of like general way. But is this where we want to be like putting all of our effort and energy into? I think there's a danger here of redirecting resources into something that is just going to be another kind of message campaign. So like I support it in the sense of like I think it's 100% valid for Biden to be challenged, and I'm going to support anyone who wants to do that. But giving like the kind of like also just being consistent with what I've been saying for the past few years on politics in this country. The thing that is in front of us is actually way more complicated than just creating the right messaging for a presidential campaign.
Yeah.
Finding a way to organize working class people so that they can have the capacity to be able to implement the things that we want. Because the idea that what we need is yet again like another kind of public education campaign on these things. I think that that's wrongheaded. And look, I don't mean this even as like a personal criticism of Marianne Williamson. Again, as I said, like this is somebody I would vote for if it's Biden Williamson in the Democratic Party primary. I think it's important for us as socialists to start being very explicit about our politics, and the socialist politics and the socialist policy and like the idea behind it is much deeper than just like policy.
Yeah.
It's actually about a bottom up movement versus a top down movement. And you know, this is, I think, something that a lot of people, especially people who do media and stuff like that, it's not as easy, it's not as sexy, it's not like something that's going to drive views or attention or anything like that. And again, I'm not even trying to criticize people who are like really going to go in hard for Marianne, because I get why people are wanting to do it, because it seems like that's like the thing. If you want to be a public in opposition to Biden, that's the thing to attach yourself to. So like, I'm not worked up about people for it, but I'm just saying that what we have to do is find ways to be organizing working class people and working class communities to start to express their power and to start cultivate leaders from those communities versus imposing top down leaders on those communities. You get what I'm saying? So instead of being, I'm a voice for the voiceless, being like, I am a voice of the voiceless. Like, I am from this, I am of this, this is my people, this is who I am. And it just like at a certain, you can't recruit that from media figures or national political figures. That's something that has to happen organically. And it sucks because like we need somebody right now, 100%. We need somebody in 2024. I get the urgency, right? But if we don't have it, we're just setting ourselves up to do this again and to get a lot of excitement and then to lose and then to be demoralized again. And like it's hard work, it's slow work, it sucks, it's not sexy, it's not the easiest thing to like jump into, but that's the real thing that unfortunately has to happen. And I think we need to get better at trying to prepare ourselves to like cultivate and build leadership and capabilities to be able to have people to be in that position, so that we're not just sort of hoping that people can sort of come in after the fact. Last thing I'll say, I know I've been going really long, Matt, but like last thing I'll say, and this is just me putting cards on the table, I think that it's not good for the socialist movement to continue having like people who aren't socialists basically being the people who are pushing forward. Yep. I mean, I think Marianne Williamson is correct. I think Marianne Williamson has a lot of heart. I think Marianne Williamson sees the same things that I see in society, and she wants to see them change. I don't think she comes from it from like a materialist worldview that I do, right? And I think that we need to be cultivating that understanding, because the point is, it's not a purity test, right? It's not anything like that. It's that these are weapons that we have developed as a working class that help us understand the world and help us react to many different situations that are going to be put in front of us, right? In different historical contexts and different, you never know what's going to happen in the future. And not having those tools that we've developed over these past, couple of centuries of like struggle, I think it's something that we need to be worried about. Non-socialists sort of benefiting maybe from people who are socialist, if that makes sense, right? Because like most of the people who are going to be supporting Marianne Williamson, I think, are going to be anti-capitalist. They're going to be radicals. They're going to be people who are outside of like the Democratic Party, like people who are Democrats in the sense of like in part of like the party structure of the Democratic Party are not going to be supporting Marianne Williamson, right? Right? Not even like a Tulsi Gabbard type is going to be behind Marianne Williamson, like right. Attorney. So the people who are going to be doing the groundwork are going to be socialists. And like at a certain point, like we need to be developing and sending up people from our perspective. We've already learned what's happened when we start supporting people who are 1 foot in, 1 foot out. AOC, right? The squad. Like we've been seeing what happens when we elevate people who aren't really well versed, aren't really well committed to all these things. And what that means for our movement. And I think it's important to be accurate about that. So anyways, I have more to say on this, but I feel like I've been talking too much. I'll just say really briefly to sum up, I'm going to defend Marianne Williamson from all of the attacks that she's going to get from the Biden administration, the media. I'm going to defend Marianne Williamson from all of these kind of like progressive center left, like gatekeeper folks. And I'm also going to say that like the things that she's arguing for are good and that we should have in any kind of rational country. And that like, hell, if the Democratic Party was putting forward things like Marianne Williamson's like going to run on, it'd be a hell of a lot better country than it is right now. I am going to be a little tepid on whether or not I think this is the vehicle that's going to like spur class consciousness or working class movement in this country. It just as of right now, maybe that'll change. That'd be great if it changed. But as of right now, I don't see that being what's going to happen.
Yeah, and it's not going to be changed by like how many podcasts get on board. Like I think what you said about the defensiveness, that's how I view our role. Defense more than offense. We're playing cornerback here and defending that like cultivation of a genuine left wherever it can happen. And like I said, like that's why like Packman coming in here saying, well, let's get NGO leaders. Like that's a big problem. But like the message is like, go back to, actually bringing a coalition and organizing, using this as an opportunity to organize an actual left movement, and get that sort of buy-in. So like, I mean, to go back to the like force the vote, the thing that really first of all originally supported it, the thing that became a problem is when you're like going back and forth with frankly like the nurses union, and like that's when it became like a problem. Same with like the anti-war movement. Like it's one thing to have a difference of opinion with different podcasters, it's another to like be going at the actual like anti-war left. That right, like that's and that's part of like being defensive about this stuff being cultivated. So like that's and I don't see Williamson as a real threat to that. But I'll like David said, she's fundamentally not like really cultivating the same sort of garden that we want to be. I mean, I don't know if I want to phrase it like that, but like like you said, like it's not even Bernie level of like on the agenda.
This is like the point is like this is not somebody who's cynical. This is not somebody who I think is trying to use people or like has any kind of ulterior motives, right? I think it's somebody who is genuinely worried about the state of this country, and I'm with her 100%.
Right.
And I support her decision to run, and I support her campaign in that sense, right? And I would also say, you know where I would flip, by the way, Matt, like and becoming a much more rabid supporter is if like unlikely scenario, someone else jumps in, like Ro Khanna, somebody who I don't trust at all, and I think is dangerous to the progressive movement, and tries to capture like the Bernie energy. I would jump in more rapidly to like direct that in that way than to that, right?
We better start buying our Marianne merch because something like that's bound to happen. I think like there's going to be.
I mean, look,
like
what I'm saying is like I will flip the switch 100% because like if I think that right now the Bernie movement is in flux and it can go a lot of different ways, and it's been really unfortunate. And the unfortunate thing about the Bernie movement is because it came about in the context of a president. This has been like this is David like greatest hits point, right? You know what I mean? Is that like because the Bernie movement cultivated a lot of people to think about politics and start thinking about themselves as socialists, but did so in the context of a presidential campaign. I think a lot of people will struggle with what to do when they're not in that moment. So people are always looking for who's going to be the next flag bearer. And I've always been worried that it's going to be captured by somebody who, might support some things that we support, but also wants to pull that movement back into like the Democratic Party proper. Right. And that's where Marianne Williamson as an outsider is somebody who I would support 100% over Katie Porter, who is again not somebody who I think is going to run for president. I'm just naming figures to think about like where their politics are, like a Jayapal, Ro Khanna, those kind of folks. If those people were to come in and start trying to pull the Bernie movement one way, I would go very hard for Marianne. Right?
Yeah. On that note, fucking Katie Porter.
Oh my Lord! Yeah, do you see that about Netanyahu?
Yeah, I mean, look, this has been known.
We're Barbara Lee, right, on this?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Like when that happened, like we mentioned that we've covered a Democratic majority for Israel and AIPAC spending in Democratic primaries. Porter was a big recipient of that, and like you've even had Jayapal. Bernie talking about it is one thing that's great. If even Jayapal is saying like we actually have to look at this as a problem. And then you have Katie Porter on the other hand, supposedly being the new fucking progressive. And she's saying, oh yeah, we got to talk with fucking Bibi a little bit closer. Like unbelievable. And so, yeah, there's a real problem with the progressives. And I think those California ones.
The progressives are a mess.
Yeah.
I mean, the progressive caucus, what does it mean? Look, this is like rereading that Rosa piece, man, has like just been like such like a bath You know what I mean? And just like, oh man, there are a lot of like opponents close to us, and like I don't want to be like, I think it's important not to be conspiratorial or being paranoid in politics, and also understanding that like, you know, there is going to be some level of like coalition, which I get and I'm fine with. I'm like at this point, like I understand the needs for that. But it can't come at the price of diluting what we are, right? Because if the socialist movement just becomes like a loose progressive coalition, then it's just like, well, we've wasted our time, you know, basically. And like
I
that's
mean, I mean, I don't know if we need to reiterate this. So we said this in the giving Jayapal the Bumster of the Year. like don't give your money to these candidates.
no, you shouldn't.
Because they're sharing it. Like, yeah, absolutely. I kind of think that about. Do I think that about Marianne? Like, I think like if you have extra cash and you want to throw it to Marianne, fine. But like until she gets like something like the nurses union or someone to say like, oh yeah, we're actually looking at her too.
No, until it becomes like viable in some kind of real sense, I don't think that this is something that you should be committing yourself to. Look, and that's gonna piss people off. But that's, is this a stupid? I mean, I said this to you before, Matt, but like, you know, my position on the Marianne thing is like an optimistic ambivalence, right? Optimistic in the sense of like, look, if this helps continue to like draw attention to the failure of the Democratic Party and open up doors, I'm all for it. I'm very ambivalent about this being a path to power.
Right.
And honestly, like even some of the people, friends of mine who I've talked to who have really gone into it, like they're very ambivalent about that. So that's why I'm sort of like, you know, let's not lose sight of the ball, right? To use a football term here. You know, so anyways, I mean, like, I'm curious to hear what listeners think, and you know, if you have any thoughts, please jump in the chat with those. I think we have a few calls and stuff we can get to. If Marianne ever wants to come on Left Rec, I'd be very happy to talk to her about these things too, right, Matt?
Of course. No, absolutely.
You know,
we'll get our
like,
crystal 8 ball out, or was it carry on, Jim?
I'm saying like I can be convinced. Maybe.
I mean, for like a vote, like it's a vote in a primary, sure. Like,
oh yeah, no, I mean, like I'm already convinced in my personal,
right.
Like, I'm sorry, like that's not even a question for me, right? I mean, I voted for Stein in 16. You know, I've said that multiple times. Like, I'll do that again. But again, like even in 16, I always say this is like, there's a big difference between like when I voted for Jill Stein, it was just like fuck you to Hillary Clinton. You know what I mean? Right. And I was living in DC at the time. It's like didn't even matter. It's like a personal, like I hate Hillary Clinton, I don't want to do that, kind of thing. Then there were people who were like somehow we're gonna wake up, you know, the day after election day and Jill Stein was gonna be president. That's a different kind of analysis than what I put in that place. And what I'm saying is I'll do that kind of vote again for Marianne Williamson in 2024, but I don't think it's gonna happen. Anyway, I'm curious what people think. I know I made people happy and I made other people mad and whatever, but that's just what I think. And also, like, look, I'm going to be consistent on this kind of thing. I'm not going to spend 2020 to 2023 saying the thing that the left needs to do is like be building up the capacity in the working class to start running our own candidates. And then in 2023 be like, oh, Marianne Williamson is who we support, you know?
Yeah.
I agree with Michael's analysis in 2020 that if it wasn't Bernie, it was Marianne in the sense of like in 2020, I would have done the same thing in the sense of like voting for her there. Mm-hmm. But I don't think this is our door to power, unfortunately, friends. And look, I mean,
and go ahead.
If our analysis, Matt, that I think you and I have both been pretty explicit about what 2020 Bernie Sanders winning the presidency in the unlikely case that it won was going to be difficult, probably demoralizing, and you know, like we can't say that for the past couple years and then say we think this is going to do it, right? Yeah. I think that that's not accurate. And like again, like I'm not trying to pick fights or like cause discord or things like that, but like look, you know, you can't say that, like, at least we can't say, right, Matt, that like we thought that, you know, the thing that Bernie was trying to do is try to cultivate a strong working class power and movement in this country to be able to mobilize and fight for these things, and saying that the president can't do these things on their own, and then say about this candidacy, which doesn't seem, to have that mobilization behind it. It doesn't. If Bernie doesn't have it, Marianne doesn't have it, right? And then act like it's different now for some reason, right? The tasks in front of us are the same. And the point, I guess, that I can say this really clearly now because we've developed it enough. The point that I'm trying to say is that it doesn't even matter how perfect the candidate is. It doesn't even matter if Marianne was better at messaging, like we were criticizing a little while ago.
Yep.
If we don't have this working class organized movement behind it, even if it can win in the sense of getting the most votes, it will lose in the sense of doing the kinds of things to this capitalist system that we need, that need to be done, right? And if you're just switching characters and you're not recognizing that fundamental analysis, you're making a grave mistake. And I think that's been the point that we've been trying to drill home with people. It's not the sexiest thing. It's not the thing that's going to get you a bunch of subscribers or anything like that. But in my opinion, it's the truth.